Hi everyone, I am Kate Mulvaney. I am a social scientist at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Research Lab in Narragansett, Rhode Island. I'm presenting work on behalf of myself and colleagues, Marisa Mazada and Nate Merrill. The work that we're doing looks at how people develop their perceptions of coastal water quality, particularly through the lens of coastal recreation. More than 50 million people visit salty beaches every year in the United States. There's a lot of different reasons why anyone chooses to go to a particular site, but one of those reasons is water quality. And people make decisions about where to go and what to do there based on their perceptions of the water quality. And so what we want to understand is what influences perceptions of water quality, and do those perceptions match biophysical measurements and policies? To ask those questions, I'm going to be talking about the application of two different methods. We use both focus groups of coastal recreationists as well as a mail and internet survey of New England coastal recreationists as well. For the purposes of this research, our definition of recreation is very generous. It's people who have just intentionally visited the coastline. They don't have to have swam or boated or done anything particularly extravagant in terms of recreation, but that they've intentionally gone to visit the coast. So to start, we held 14 focus groups for water quality perceptions. The first 7 were intended for the survey that I'll talk about later, and that was to get the survey design right and the survey questions, but it included a lot of questions about water quality and how people develop their perceptions of water quality. Questions like, how would you describe the water quality at a location? What does the term water quality mean to you? What makes you think it's best or worst? And then we held 7 additional focus groups specifically for understanding water quality perceptions and sense of place related to coastal locations, asking questions about the term water quality for coastal waters, what they think affects water quality, and what makes a place best or worse. These focus groups were held at professional focus group centers, and participants were paid for their time. In the second set of groups, we held 2 groups that were intended, specifically recruited from communities that had higher percentage people of color or were lower income populations because they hadn't been recruited in kind of representative numbers before. What we learned from the focus groups was that most people really understand the term water quality. They were very consistent about understanding it. A representative quote is, when I think of water quality, I think of a lot of things. First of all, we want it to be clean, we want it to be healthy, but they didn't know what the types of pollution were. So we asked this question a number of different ways, what they think sources of pollution were, or impacts, and people generally didn't know very much about water quality concerns. People, when we asked them about factors that influence their water quality perception, or what made a place best or worse, there were a number of different attributes that remained salient across the different focus groups pretty consistently. They don't like stuff in their water. They didn't want trash or dead fish or oil. People didn't like seaweed in their water. A number of people brought up the smell of water and being able to smell if it was good or bad water. The color, if the location had a history of beach closures, a number of people mentioned that as a factor influencing their perception, as well as how kind of open they thought the site was. So enclosed harbors they saw as having worse water quality as compared to open water beaches, really the idea of flushing. And the final attribute that came up over and over and was by far the biggest contributor was clarity. So people mentioned clarity over and over. To me, it's just the water just needs to be clear. To me, that's an indication that it's healthy. I'm thinking about clean, clear water. I would probably just say the water looks clear and there's not a lot of seaweed and things floating around. I do not really like that. I like to be able to see what's around. So in addition to these attributes about the water itself, there were a number of different insights that we found useful when thinking about recreational use related to water quality. People believed they'd be told if the water was unsafe. They acknowledged they didn't check any websites or agencies ahead of their visits, but they thought they would know when they were there. And the reputation really influenced their perception. So if a place had been really impaired when they were young, they kept that, and they really still talked about it, like how bad it used to be, and so like how could it be that much better were in a lot of discussions. So that qualitative data was really insightful and provided a lot of foundation for understanding perceptions, and we built upon that in the use of a regional survey. It went out in 2018 to more than 9,000 households in New England. We oversampled for Cape Cod. We ended up with about a 16% response rate. In the survey, we didn't want to limit it to just bigger beaches because we wanted to be able to get a range of water quality and activities across like all the different types of coastal access, so ranging from boat launches to kayak points to just scenic vistas, or fishing spots or shell fishing areas, for example. What we found is a range of perceptions. We asked, how do you think the water quality usually is on average at that place? We wanted to get a general sense, going all the way from the worst possible, kind of devoid of life and pretty atrocious, to best possible, perfect, great. And what we found was that when people talked about their last trip, so the last place that they had gone to any coastal area intentionally for a trip, was pretty high, so a 7.9, which is relatively high on a scale out of 10. We wanted to anchor that with an understanding of the range of places that people really go. So we asked about, in the last 5 years, where was the place you went with the worst water quality, and where was the place that you went with the best water quality within coastal New England. And we found that the worst was a 4.6 on average, and the best was an 8.7. And so when people are talking about water quality, they're kind of accurately connecting that there aren't that many places that are really terrible. That our worst places, if you put your foot in, it's going to be okay. And they're not devoid of life. There's still stuff living there and happening. But our best places aren't perfect either. And so the perceptions overall narrowed in to a smaller range than this kind of awful to perfect. When we see the perceptions mapped, they match pretty well with what we would think. So places like Boston Harbor and Providence, big urban centers, they get the lower water quality scores, so a bigger red, the bigger red circles or the kind of warmer colors, or the bigger the circle, the worse the water quality. Those smaller bluer circles, those that indicate better water quality, and you see those in rural Maine, outer Cape Cod, and some of the islands, for example, so places with fewer people and less impairments likely. So again, in the focus groups, there were a number of influences that were identified from our focus groups for their perceptions of water quality, and we wanted to understand how those different components contributed to their overall perceptions. And so we asked about the condition of the water based on those attributes: seaweed, algae and scum, bacteria, water clarity, muckiness, oil sheen, odor, and trash. And we think about that just in a basic regression of what builds to our overall water quality perception. And so what we see comes out, clarity is again the big contributor to the overall perception. So clarity is an order of magnitude in terms of coefficient, greater than the other attributes with a coefficient of 0.3. It's the most statistically significant. Overall, the attributes together explain quite a bit of the overall perception with an R-squared of 0.55. This is just a basic linear regression. We also ran an ordinal logit model as well as conditional inference trees, and they tell us the same story, that clarity is really the big influence on perceptions of water quality overall. 2.55. Building upon that, what we're hoping in the long run to do, and this is work that we're just starting, and you'll see we haven't made it very far, is connecting these social perceptions to biophysical data. And so connecting what the components of these attributes, how well do they match what our kind of best scientific data can tell us. And what we found is that there isn't always kind of best biophysical data available for a site. We have been aggregating data from a lot of different sources over the last couple of years, last 5 years or so, and there's not a lot of data that is necessarily appropriate at scale, so it can't tell us about where human use actually occurs. We have trouble getting most of these attributes. The closest we've gotten is using satellite data for both chlorophyll and clarity, and then using policy attributes like beach closure days, or percent shellfish closure, or 303D listings for some of the other attributes. But a lot of it also remains kind of undocumented in a way that we can use at scale. So when we run a basic regression doing the same thing, trying to estimate the overall water quality perception based off of the attributes of the biophysical data of clarity and chlorophyll, so how the color and how clear, as well as the policies in place about approval for shellfish and number of impaired water listing, we don't find that we can explain very much of the perceptions. So what we have a very incomplete picture at this point. When we try to couple in even more, when we try to take attributes of who the people are from the survey in terms of basic demographics, as well as recreational avidity, we find that we still don't explain very much, that the R-squared is really just 0.06, with several significant attributes, age, gender, shellfish closures, both clarity and chlorophyll, but we're really not explaining very much of those overall perceptions. So we still have a long ways to go. In summary, people generally know what water quality is. They don't know the causes or the impacts. The characteristics of water and shoreline are consistent. People's perceived characteristics of water quality were pretty informative towards their overall perception. Clarity came out in both the focus groups and the survey as really the biggest contributor towards perceptions, and there's a lot of room to still go in connecting biophysical data with perceptions. Thank you. I appreciate your time, and there's my contact information if you need more. Thank you.